The afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, casting soft golden light on the chaos of our apartment. Boxes were stacked against the walls, some half-packed, others overflowing with the remnants of our lives. The warmth of the day clung to my skin as I moved around in my oversized t-shirt, the fabric brushing against my thighs. I hadn't bothered to dress properly. Why would I? It was just us working in sync, laughing, and taking our time. When the knock came at the door, it startled me. My stomach twisted in unease. A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering that I wasn't ready for anyone to see me like this. Before I could say anything, he answered the door. I stood frozen for a moment, half hidden behind a pile of boxes as I heard familiar voices, Tom and Chris. My heart sank. They were his friends, but I knew them well enough. I'd heard their jokes, their comments. He'd felt the way their eyes lingered a second too long during previous visits. A chill ran through me as I peeked around the corner, catching their grinning faces. I forced a polite nod and slipped into the bedroom, muttering something about changing. Inside, I stared at my reflection, heart racing as I pulled on a pair of shorts. I brushed my hair with trembling fingers, trying to shake the feeling of dread creeping over me. They're just here to help, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But the way they had looked at me, hungry, predatory, was etched into my mind. I felt vulnerable, exposed. When I came back out, they were joking and laughing with him. Their energy filled the room, loud and overwhelming. I tried to focus on packing, staying out of their way. Every so often, I felt their eyes on me, their glances quick but deliberate. I avoided their gaze, silently praying for this to be over soon. Then, he said he needed to leave to grab more supplies. My chest tightened. "Do you have to go now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, brushing it off, promising he'd be back in a few minutes. Before I could protest, the door shut behind him, and I was alone with them. As soon as he left, the door clicking shut behind him, the tension in the room became palpable. I could feel the air shift, thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on me. Tom and Chris exchanged glances, their smiles curling into something that made my stomach churn. I kept my head down, pretending to focus on packing, hoping they'd lose interest, but they didn't. Tom moved closer, his footsteps deliberate and slow, his presence looming beside me. "You seem tense," he murmured, his tone smooth but laced with something predatory. Before I could respond, his hand brushed against my arm, light at first, almost testing. The contact sent a shiver through me, my skin prickling. "You don't have to be so shy around us," he added, his voice soft but coaxing. I tried to step away, but Chris was already behind me, his chest brushing against my back as he leaned in. I could feel his breath on my neck, warm and unsettling, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. "You're so quiet," he said, his voice low and teasing. His hands came to rest lightly on my shoulders, and I tensed, my entire body on high alert. Tom smirked, his eyes dropping to my legs, lingering there far too long before traveling back up to meet my gaze. "You really do look good in that shirt," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "It's cute." He reached out, his fingers grazing the hem of my t-shirt where it barely covered my thighs. The touch was fleeting, but it left a trail of heat and discomfort in its wake. Almost too cute. My breathing quickened as I tried to step back. But Chris' hands tightened slightly on my shoulders, holding me in place. "Relax," he murmured, his lips uncomfortably close to my ear. I could feel his hands starting to move, his fingers brushing over my collarbone, then sliding down the curve of my shoulders. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. Tom took advantage of my stillness, stepping closer until he was directly in front of me. His hand reached out again, this time resting on my hip, his thumb brushing the bare skin just above the waistband of my shorts. "You've got such soft skin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he were speaking to himself. His hand slid downward, his fingers grazing the curve of my thigh before moving back up. I tried to step away, but his other hand came up, resting lightly on my waist. The touch was deceptively gentle, but it felt like chains holding me in place. "Don't be scared," he said, his tone meant to sound reassuring. But it only made my stomach twist. "We're just being friendly." Chris' hands were moving again, sliding down from my shoulders to the tops of my arms, then brushing along my sides. His fingers skimmed the outer curve of my chest, not quite touching, but close enough to make my breath hitch. "You're so soft," he murmured, almost as if to himself. His hands lingered, fingers brushing the sides of my breasts through the fabric of my shirt. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as his touch became bolder. Tom took it further. His hand slid around my waist, his fingers splaying across my lower back. I felt his other hand move up, tracing the line of my spine through the thin fabric of my shirt. When his hand came to rest on the small of my back, I flinched, my body instinctively trying to pull away. But he only held me tighter. His grip firm but not forceful. "You're trembling," he said, his voice soft but teasing. "Are we making you nervous?" Chris chuckled behind me, his hands sliding lower to rest on my hips, trapping me between them. I felt his fingers dig in slightly, as if testing the firmness of my body. His hands moved again, skimming the sides of my thighs before brushing back up toward my waist. "She's definitely nervous," he said, his tone amused. "But I think she likes it." Their words sent a fresh wave of heat and shame through me. And I hated the way my body was betraying me. My breaths were shallow and quick, my skin hypersensitive to every touch. Tom's hand moved higher again, grazing the edge of my breast, and I tensed, a strangled sound escaping my throat. He paused for a moment, his eyes meeting mine, searching for something, permission, defiance, maybe both. When I didn't move, he smirked and let his hand slide further, cupping the curve of my breast lightly. "You're so soft," he murmured, his thumb brushing over the fabric. My breath hitched, my chest rising and falling rapidly as my mind screamed for this to stop. But my body felt frozen, trapped in the overwhelming intensity of their touches. Chris' hands joined in, one sliding up my arm while the other brushed against my side, his fingers grazing the underside of my breast. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me, my body reacting involuntarily. I hated the way their hands seemed to know exactly where to touch to make my skin burn, to make me feel both exposed and powerless. Tom's hand moved lower again, brushing over my stomach and back to the hem of my t-shirt. He tugged at it slightly, as if considering pulling it up, and my breath caught in my throat, and I let their hands all over me. I closed my eyes and had the moment, just when I thought something more was going to happen. The sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. Relief and a bit of disappointment flooded through me as I heard his voice calling out, his cheerful tone oblivious to the tension that had filled the room just seconds before. Tom and Chris stepped back, their hands falling away as they exchanged knowing smirks. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to compose myself, desperate to hide what had just happened. As he walked in, smiling and joking with them, I forced a smile, praying he wouldn't notice the tremor in my hands or the flush in my cheeks. But even as I took a shower later that evening, recounting everything that had happened, I could still feel their hands on me. Their touches lingering had me close my eyes and think about it.